Welcome to Good Friday at Compass Online. This is a time where we will take a moment to pause, to remember together the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. We remember the ultimate act of love, the moment when Jesus gave his life for us, bearing the weight of our sins. It's a time of reflection, but also of deep gratitude. Though we're mourning the pain Jesus endured, we also know that his sacrifice leads to our hope and salvation. As we worship together, let's open our hearts to the depth of God's love for us and reflect on the incredible cost of that love. So I invite you to set aside anything that might distract you and join me in remembering that through Jesus' suffering, we are made whole. A great light dawns in Galilee. Some say madman, some say king. Wonder-working rebel priest, Jesus Christ the Nazarene. He knew well what it would take to free us all from sin and grave. The perfect man would have to die, and only he could pay that price. So he let those soldiers take him in, as his friend betrayed him with a there before the mocking crowds, like a lamb to the slaughter, didn't make a sound. So he carried that cross to Calvary and shed his blood to set us free. As the nails went in and the sky went dark, redemption of the world was on his heart. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Oh, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt
A number of years ago, my wife Carrie and I were selling our home in Orange County. We had a condo, we were just married, and it came time to move. And so we entered into the real estate selling market, which was crazy for us. But as we were doing this, we realized we're looking around the house and we needed to get as much bang for our buck as we could. And so we started doing all of the cosmetic things that we all do when we sell a house, if you've ever gone through that joy. And the painting of the little spots on the wall, the trying to fix the dents in the drywall, anything to up the value so you can get as much out of the sale as possible. And there was a time in that where I was like, how much am I just putting, to use the phrase, lipstick on a pig here, and how much will this actually help? And how much am I trying just to cover up because I'm ashamed of what I've done to this house over the past 6 years of living here? And that idea of covering things up so that we can get the most value out of what we have, it's something that's common for us, and it's not just limited to real estate values. We do the same with our lives. Our lives, sometimes we view our lives as if we have this social market that we have to capitalize on. And so we do things here and there to hide certain aspects about ourselves so that we could be accepted by the people we're interacting with. At times we're afraid that our social market value will drop if we disappoint somebody. And so we begin to play the game of presenting ourselves the best. And so we start to hide. We start to live a lie. We start to take on new identities. We don't want people to see who we are because, like my wife in our house back in the day, we're ashamed of the inadequacy that we might have. And this idea of inadequacy is this idea of shame that we all carry. In some ways, each one of us, no matter who you are, carry with us this sense of shame. Places in our lives where we feel that we are defective, ultimately that we're unworthy. And this shame, the sense of defectiveness, is us feeling like we're not enough or that we're coming up short. It begins with actions or perhaps thoughts that you might regret. Then there's this feeling of discomfort or distress from those failures, like if anyone ever finds out about this, I'm hosed. And then comes the self-criticism. I wish I wouldn't have done this, and now I have to hide, and now I need to conceal who I am, and especially what I've done, because I'm not going to get the social market value back from my mistakes. This shame that we all carry is the enemy of every human being. And when we're trapped by shame, our instinctual reaction is to hide our shame. And oftentimes we hide in our shame. You might feel like a million set of eyes are watching you and looking at all the stuff, and you're like over in the corner saying, don't look at this instead. You're hiding from those million eyes, and you don't want anyone to see it. This idea of shame, it's not new. It's something that we've had since the beginning of time. In fact, in the opening chapters of Genesis, especially in chapter 3, we begin to see shame take shape. If you remember the story, Adam and Eve were content in the garden. God had created them. He created everything around them. And he looked at them and said, you are good. You are my breath. You are my image. You're very good. Everything else was just good, but human beings were very good. And they walked in the garden with God. They had everything that they needed. And then as you turn the pages, you're introduced to the serpent who embodies Satan. And in that story, the serpent begins to plant the story in their minds that they're not enough. That in some ways, God was selling them short, that they could do better, that God didn't give them the full everything that they needed. And then they begin to believe it. They believed what the lies were, that they were in some way imperfect. And that imperfection was something that they needed to fix, something that they needed to make perfect. And that something that they needed to make that thing perfect was over there on that tree. And if they were to eat that fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then their social market value would be better. And they could be, as the serpent said, like God. And so the serpent played on this fear of shame, and he stoked those embers into flame, and none of anything of what the serpent was saying was true. They had nothing to be afraid of. Adam and Eve had everything they needed. They couldn't find any more worth than what they already had. God's love is the only thing that can fill that void, and they had it. They had that relationship with God in perfect harmony. Yet, Eve believed the lies not only about themselves, but those lies compounded, and then they began to believe those lies about God. And when she did, Adam believed Eve, and they ate from that tree. And the fruit of the tree made them believe that they were smart enough to decide what was ultimately good and what was ultimately evil. They became the judges, but the problem with that is they also became the accusers as well. And so they would accuse themselves of something wrong, and then they would judge on themselves. This has to be true because this is what I'm feeling. They judged themselves, and then they decided that they were defective and something was wrong with them. And then they found out that they were naked. Before this, they were naked and they felt like they had nothing to hide. But after this, they felt exposed. Their nakedness began to symbolize on the outside the shame that they were feeling on the inside. In Jewish culture, where this was initially written for, being naked and being seen by anyone other than your spouse was probably the most shameful thing that could ever happen to you. They were exposed and they were embarrassed. And so they began to place strategically placed fig leaves around them. We've all seen the flannel graphs of that, right? And they began to hide from each other. In their shame, they judged themselves. And then they began to blame God, thinking of him as this judgmental deity. And so they hid from him. What's God gonna think if he sees me as this? And then they started, when God asked them questions, they began to hide even more. They began to blame. They made the deflecting excuses. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent that God created. In a roundabout way, she's blaming God. If you didn't place this serpent here, we wouldn't have had this problem. They felt inadequate. They felt not enough. And this has been the exact condition of every human being since then. And because of this, what they believed was a false picture of God. And it began to see our identity and our worth and not trust what God says about us. And then the result of this is we run on empty because we're constantly trying to hide and fill something and to fill that space. And what we're really doing is building up these facades. And then somehow we conclude that we're not good enough. We're not holy enough. We're not religious enough. We're not talented enough. I'm not good looking enough. We're not skinny enough. We're not whatever it is that you're feeling enough. Whatever counts as your social market worth, and wherever you find that worth, we don't have enough of it. Like my house that I was selling before it hit the market, there was never enough that I can do to make it perfect. And so we walked around trying to hide of it. And it's a shame. And this is what shame is. And so we hide in our shame. Or we try and change the game a little bit. And this is what I do. If I'm not good looking enough, my wife tells me I am, but sometimes I feel like I'm not. She can be biased, I hope. If I'm not good looking enough, then I'll try and be funny. And maybe I'll win people over with my drastic sense of humor. Or if I'm not athletic enough, then I'll be the smart one in the room, which sometimes that works for me. We trade the game to gain this social market value. We amplify other things in order to hide the places where we think we're defective. We all do this. If we think about why we do things, we'll come to the conclusion that we all do this in some way or another. When was the first time that you felt that you needed to hide from something or hide something about yourself out of shame because you felt like you weren't enough? When was the first time that you felt your social market value begin to tank? And what was that fig leaf that you reached over there and grabbed in order to hide what you were shameful of? Are you still reaching for that fig leaf today? And this highlights one of the beauties of the cross that I want us to focus on this Good Friday. The beauty of the cross and what we see Jesus do for us there tells us the truth that we no longer need to reach for those fig leaves that we're so accustomed to reaching for. Here's what I mean. And the author of Hebrews says it this way. He begins in chapter 12, verse 1. He says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such great cloud of witnesses, let's throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." In verse 2, "Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." There's a phrase there in those verses, and I wonder if you picked it up. It said Jesus despised the shame. He despised, more specifically, the shame of the cross. Now, the Greek word there for despise means to count as insignificant. It was nothing for him. He disregarded how shameful the cross was. We try and translate it to words that you and I say. He didn't think it was a big deal. Jesus considered the shame of the cross insignificant because of the joy that was set before him. When Jesus faced the nightmares of the cross, he could only see what was on the other side of it, where you and I were set free from our shame. Because of the cross, we would be set free from this need to hide. And this is huge. We don't need to hide anymore. But to really understand this, we need to answer the question, what was so shameful about crucifixion? Crucifixion was Rome's favorite way of executing people. It was the ultimate deterrent for anything bad or any kind of rebellion. If someone broke their law, the army would round up the rebels. They would crucify them on a local hill and leave them there as an example of saying, "This is what happens to you if you do that." And they left them there for that example. But what made crucifixion this excellent deterrent was this demonic brilliance that combined maximum pain with maximum shame and humiliation. As with Jesus, part of the process of crucifixion was they would take the condemned, and then before they crucified them, they would beat them. They would mock them. They would get the crowds to join in, and we see this in the crucifixion story. But the most shameful aspect, especially for Jews in that day, was that they were stripped naked and then ordered to walk through town unclothed, entirely naked. They'd march through town carrying the cross, and people would taunt them. They would spit on them. They would make jokes about their bodily features. They would just eviscerate them in front of everybody. And for a Jewish person to be nailed on the cross was one thing, but for a Jewish person to be nailed naked on the cross was unimaginable. And they would stay on that cross until they were dead, and in some cases, that likely would take days. Yet Jesus knew all of this. He knew that this was coming. He foretold that this was coming. He knew the shame that he was walking into. He knew it was coming his way, and he looked at all of it. He looked at everything he was going to go through and says, "I count it as joy because of what's on the other side." The joy of him finally seeing the people that he created being able to live without the shame that we all carry. To be set free from the bondage, from this innate desire that we all have to hide. And so Jesus embraced the shame that you and I hide from. The places that we think we need to cover up, Jesus says, "I put that all on me, and I'm going to take it to the cross." And in doing so, he absorbs our shame, but he also reveals something about God. One of the most important truths that he reveals about God in that moment is that you and I don't need to hide any longer. Remember when Jesus said in John 14, he says, "I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life." That word that he uses for truth in Greek means to uncover something. It means to come out of hiding. What was hidden is now exposed. And it's an interesting word when you think about it in this context. Because as Jesus was naked on the cross, he was exposing for us the true nature of God. Jesus, as we see in Paul's writing, is uncovering what God is really like. And if Jesus was uncovering what God was really like, we need to ask ourselves, what ways do we cover God up? And the answer to that is the lies of the serpent that led to all of these false things that we ever thought about ourselves and all of these false things that we've ever thought about God in the past. Throughout history, we've covered God up by dressing him in our own image, in our own assumptions. Sometimes we'll say that God is too violent, and so I don't really want to believe in him. Other times we dress him up as this self-centered deity that only does things for his own good. Or we dress him up as a God who's off and distant, like a sleepy grandfather taking a nap somewhere and doesn't want to be disturbed. He's just off doing his, God stuff. In doing that, we've covered up God in lies. And on the cross, Jesus unravels all of those false garments and ideas that we've placed on God. And as Jesus walks to the cross with joy, he reveals God's true nature. He bore our shame while simultaneously unveiling the image of the true God, the God who has nothing to hide, the God who on the cross says, "This is who I am. This is all of me, nothing hidden." And if God isn't hiding from us, then we don't have to feel the need to hide from him either. Jesus reveals to us that God is a self-sacrificing, other-oriented, loving person that extends the core from his being to ours and says, "Come, I want a relationship with you." This is what God is like. Bearing our shame, revealing he is truly the one who can remove it and come next to us. He's not put off by our inadequacies. When we see the true God, we can finally trust that God to be the source of our enough, and it swallows up all of the shameful parts about us. This means we don't need to hide anymore. We don't need to do the quick paint jobs in order to cover up our imperfections and to up our social worth. Because on Calvary, God established your value unconditionally once and for all. The cross puts a stamp on us and says your value is unsurpassable. One author said that when we come to God, we have a list of all of our things, and on the cross, Jesus takes that list and puts it behind his hand, in between his hand and the cross, and the nail goes through it, and his blood covers up our list of inadequacies. And God says, I don't see those shameful pieces anymore. I see you. And Jesus saw that as something to be joyful about. And he was willing to pay that immense price for us. We don't need to hide, and we can be free. The cross reveals the unsurpassable, unwavering, incomprehensible, steadfast type of love that God has for us. And if God can see our unsurpassable value, we can't add a single thing to it by hiding. If God's love is unconditional, our imperfections can't detract from the price he joyfully paid for us. These social market scores that we carry around become irrelevant because we know who we are in Christ and we experience what that looks like. And so we can opt out of that whole market system. So much so that if a law was passed today that said no more buying of sellings of homes, no one would be worried about the blemishes that those homes carry. There would be no reason to hide anymore. It's only when we try and sell that the blemishes are revealed, but we don't have to do that anymore. We could take away the hiding because we have nothing to lose and we have everything to gain. We know that we are loved with this type of love. We're unconditionally loved. We don't need to impress others, and we can impress God more than we already have. We stop hiding because we have no reason to fear. God is who he is, and we are loved to the fullest extent because of that. The love that we have from God becomes the very things that begin to grow out of our faults, out of our wounds. These weaknesses that we have become our strengths because God doesn't see them as imperfections. He sees them as opportunities. Many believe that God frees us from our shame by freeing us from our sin, but I think it's the other way around. He frees us from our shame and allows us to stop hiding and confessing our sins, and then enables us to grow to becoming more like Christ in the areas where we were weak. This grace that we get up front changes everything. And when I know that I am truly loved, that's the thing that empowers me to love others in a certain way. When I know that I'm truly loved, I can live differently. When I know that I have nothing to hide, I can be my authentic self, saying, this is who I am, this is where God is working on me at, and it's still good. The shame on the cross reveals a God who removes our shame, and it allows us, like the Hebrew verse in the very beginning says, to remove all of the things that we have put on and covered ourselves up that hinder us from running the race that is set before us. Because Jesus went to the cross, the shame that slows us down from living this life that Jesus has for us, we can discard and run faster. For the joy of seeing us set free, Jesus disregarded the shame of the cross, and it changes everything if we trust him to do it. When we look at him as the source of our importance and our enough, our lives will be able to surrender our shame and put it on the cross with Jesus and then be set free from it. Some of us today are dealing with that right now. This idea that you're not enough, that God would never love someone like you, or he might love bits and pieces of you, he might love this aspect of you, but not that part of you, that some way you're defective, and none of that is true. You have nothing to be ashamed of when it comes to God's love for you, and the cross symbolizes that. And if that's you tonight, I hope that you can grab a hold of that Jesus wants to set you free from that feeling that you have to hide. The reality of you and I being set free from our shame was the joy that allowed Christ to bear that. He counted it joyful because he wants to see you run free. One of my favorite things to do in my house now, we have this window that overlooks this green space, and we get to watch our boys play. And one of the best things that we notice is when they just run. They're like dogs with zoomies. They're just everywhere. And it's fun to see my boys run and play unhindered. And it brings me joy, one, because they're faster than me and I could never catch them. But the other part is they're being free to be who they are. And this is what the joy of the cross was, that Jesus can take that sin that weighs us down and remove it so that we can go in the green space across the street and run free. And we know that this is the case because it says so all through the Bible. In Psalm 103, it says that you and I have a God that takes our sin and shame and casts it as far as the east is from the west. In 2 Corinthians 12, when we're afraid that God's grace isn't enough, 2 Corinthians 12 says that we serve a God with more than enough grace to go around. And when we're afraid that if we confess something that God will hold it against us, Romans 10 says that we serve a God that will forgive us and remove the sin and shame if we confess it to him. And sometimes we feel that we can out-sin God's grace, but John 3 shows us that there is enough love and grace for you and I to keep coming to him. And then all of these bad things that we've done in our lives, all of these things that we're ashamed of, all of our regrets, Romans 8 says that God can weave together all of these storylines and make something beautiful. We don't have to be ashamed of all of that or fear any of that. On the cross, we see a God inviting us to look at him and to know that in him we are complete. Do we still have hang-ups? Yes, absolutely. Do we still have areas in our lives where we need to be working on? 100%. But we don't need to hide from them. And when those things come up in our lives, we can look at it and go, yes, Lord, you're right. And with your help, I will get through that. because we begin to know that his grace and his love is sufficient and enough. And so we never have to worry about being less anymore. And this is one of the viewpoints that we have as we come to Good Friday. The beauty of the cross for us is that you and I can live this life unhindered because of the sacrifice that was made on the cross. And tonight, as we take communion, or today, whenever you're watching this, as we take communion, it's a point where we can look at the cross, see what Jesus did, and begin to uncover what we're hiding. And we no longer have to hide it from him anymore, and so we can be set free of shame. And communion symbolizes that what Jesus' action on the cross did for us. Through the bread and through the wine, we remember his sacrifice. So if you want to take communion with us tonight, we'll pause this for a minute and go get a bread-like substance and a juice-like substance, whatever you have in the cupboard, and join with us tonight. That night, before Jesus was crucified, he was betrayed. And he took the bread that evening and he broke it in front of them and said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And he said, as long as you come together and eat this, remember me. Remember my love for you. Remember my love for you that can transform you. Hang-ups and everything. Let's eat. That same night, he took the cup and he lifted it and said, "This is the cup of the new and everlasting covenant. It is my blood which will be shed for you, so that when you come together and drink this, you'll remember me. This is the blood that covers up all of our imperfections." And he said, "Drink this and remember the joy that is set in front of me." And when we drink this cup, we symbolize that Jesus has taken our shame and abolished it so that we can run free with him and be who he created us to truly be. Would you pray with me? Father, we do thank you for the cross. We thank you for taking our shame, the places where we feel like we need to hide, the places where we feel that we can't expose. And you look at those things and you say, "I love you still. There's no reason to hide from me anymore." Jesus, we thank you for your sacrifice on that cross for our sin. We thank you for absorbing all of that stuff. And we thank you that you even counted it as joyful to do so. It was your pleasure to do this on our behalf. We thank you for your sacrifice and what it means for us tonight. Now, Jesus, may your power through the cross enable us to run free. May we look at those shameful things and no longer be held captive by them. And may we, like Hebrews says, cast those things off and run the race set before us, unencumbered by the things that would hold us back. And it's in your name we thank you. Amen.
Friday's good 'cause Sunday is coming. Don't lose hope 'cause Sunday is coming. Devil, you're done, you better start running. Friday's good 'cause Sunday is coming. Yeah, Friday's good 'cause Sunday is coming. Don't lose hope 'cause Sunday is coming. Devil, you're done, you better start running. Friday's good 'cause Sunday